This is episode 77 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by InspectPoint. We've got a reoccurring guest again today, Shawn Mahoney from NFPA. He's one of their senior technical people over there. He's been posting a lot of great videos on his LinkedIn and social media on not 101, but a little more like maybe 101, 102, 103, just on different fire protection aspects, and kind of caught on to this. And he posted something the other day regarding passive fire protection with regards to fire doors, fire dampers, and smoke dampers. I thought this was a great topic because I feel like our industries on the fire protection side is really great with fire alarm, fire sprinkler, fire suppression, but the passive side kind of gets overlooked, right? By obviously the service companies, but that's all being pushed by enforcement in the AHJs. They're being installed. These passive systems are being installed into buildings, but are they regulated to be maintained? It is in the code, so we get into the whole problem with that, and really how simple it is to keep these passive systems maintained and up to date. So great to have Shawn on. We talked a little bit about the NFPA conference and expo here in June upcoming. So yeah, on to the podcast. Shawn, what's happening?
Not much. How about you?
You got a ductless
ductless mini split, yeah.
Yeah, you got a mini split behind you. I love those things.
I do as well. I got them in my whole house.
Yeah, we put them in I actually had issues with them recently, but it was more on the install side. But they're great. They're super efficient.
Yeah, they're nice.
Look how we're starting our podcast off with HVAC.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we're going to talk about dampers.
Yeah, it's a little bit HVAC related.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on again.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've seen you've had some really good videos lately. When did you start doing this? What, last year or the year before? These little videos on social media?
I think last year I started with some. I think I had high hopes of doing like one a week last year, and that fell off in like February, March. Then this year I started again, and I'm gonna try to do one a week this year.
Yeah, I've seen he put a sprinkler one out, and then you did the fire doors and dampers, and that kind of piqued my interest. So
yeah. I'm just kind of like, I'll put videos out on whatever either something I'm working on, or if people are asking me questions about things. That's kind of what I put videos out on.
Yeah, I guess you're getting all you're getting all the input from the industry, and if you're getting a lot of questions somewhere, might as well put something out there, right? Because there are probably a lot of people that aren't asking the questions that have them. So is it just going out on is it YouTube or LinkedIn? How are you guys getting it out there?
Right now it's just on my personal LinkedIn. I did start an Instagram, which I'm kind of just using as a repository at this point. I'm just posting them all on there. It's growing a little bit, but I'm not really trying too hard.
And soon you'll be on TikTok doing all the
I'll do some dances along with the sprinklers and stuff. Yeah.
It's great. So today I want to I caught your videos the other day. It's essentially NFPA 80 fire doors and dampers, and yeah, I know you mentioned some. I didn't even know about 105. Weirdly enough, really? The smoke dampers. Yeah, I thought it was all under 80, but yeah, 105 handles the smoke side.
Yeah, so fire dampers are NFPA 80, and then smoke dampers are 105. If it's a combination, it's got to follow both of them.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. I've being in the inspection software side, we've seen a lot of inquiries over the years for 80 and smoke dampers and everything. And, it's really nicely laid out in the NFPA codes of what to do and everything. But it's funny, you have all these different sectors of fire protection with alarm, sprinkler, extinguisher, everything. And you think this would be a bigger part of the fire protection service and inspection industry, because they're expensive pieces of a building, right? Yeah. And the design of them, there's a lot that goes into them, but I don't know. I just feel the maintenance, the demand is not there that we see. So, like, how from your perspective, do you get a lot of, obviously you've seen a lot of questions here. Are they coming from owners or more contractors?
Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff that I see, at least in my role, doing some of the fire door stuff, it's all mostly from the healthcare side that I'm seeing the drive for fire door inspections, fire damper inspections, and that's because the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services requires hospitals to follow 101 in order to receive payment for that care of those individuals. So they're required to follow 101. They get their inspections by Joint Commission that they look at making sure they're doing all of those inspections. So they're obviously doing it, and they have, hospitals specifically have a lot of smoke compartmentation. So they do have a lot more of these, fire doors and fire and smoke doors that need to be inspected. And that's where it's not even really like a question on how do we do it, it's just getting it done. Right. And so I see a lot from the enforcement side. I also think it's like owners think fire protection. They think, okay, I've got a sprinkler system and a fire alarm system, and like those are my big systems that I need to like maintain. I have to pay because they were expensive to install. They look expensive. They've got all these components, but they don't think that just like a simple fire door or they don't see the value of that. And I think passive fire protection has such a huge value. People just take it for granted. They don't realize the implications of not properly maintaining those.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, obviously if there's a fire, there's a cause of a fire, but and maybe the reporting and the incident reporting on the fire department and fire service side are like, what is the reason why that fire spread? And there's multiple cases that I've seen, and it was reported that fire doors were on bigger issues. There was one in New York City a few years ago, and it's just that the fire door was jammed open, right? And it just spreads. But if there's no data behind maybe some of those tragedies or incidents of like why that spread, maybe the HJs don't. I think they would understand. They know fire dynamics really well on the fire service side. So you think they'd be on top of it a little bit more for some reason.
I think people like in the fire protection side, I think everybody understands the value, and I don't know if it just comes down to an enforcement side and, just resourcing. I think that's a lot of the issues. And maybe it is more education for the owners, for them to understand like what these doors actually do. And the implications they can have. I know we were talking about, you brought up the fire and the apartment building in New York City, and that shows like one of the biggest things that we rely on those fire doors, especially in apartment complexes, right? Like especially if the building's not sprinklered, we're relying on compartmentation to keep the fire into that unit of origin. And if one of those doors is compromised, and then it spreads right to the corridor, and there goes your means of egress. And just shows the need for these fire doors and making sure that we're properly inspecting them. And then we were also talking about before, it's an education piece for the tenants, because NFPA 80 requires you to inspect it annually. A lot happens between those inspections, and it's a lot on the use. So you want to make sure you're educating the people in the apartments. Like, this is why the door needs to be shut. People just think it's a hindrance. So they're just like, oh, I'm just going to chalk the door open. It's easier for me. The fire marshal says it has to be shut, but like, it's easier just to keep it open. They need to understand that that's there to keep everybody safe,
Right. Yeah, whether it's easier to get out or whatever, or the heating or cooling is, if it's a bad apartment building or something.
Yeah, even as simple as like latching the door all the way, right? Like, if the door is not latched completely, the fire can still spread, right? That's one significant component of a fire door, is it's got to be self-closing, self-latching. If it's not latched, then you're spreading smoke, you're spreading that hot gases, and then the fire can still spread. So like, even if the door looks like it's shut, if it's not latched properly, it could still cause that fire to spread.
Yeah, it's interesting. People understand the egress side to it.
Yeah.
Like if it's a fire door, people understand that a little bit more because there's an emergency light over it or exit sign. They know that, to keep that unblocked, and I feel like there's a lot of education even with the public about that on that side for the egress, but not on the actual fire door side if there is an incident and the spread of that fire.
Yeah, people are probably like, well, it's an egress door. I'm going to chalk it open. It's going to be easier to get out, right? They don't realize that it needs to be shut. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the main, I guess we'll start with fire doors and then we can move to dampers and smoke dampers. What are the main kind of inspection components? I know you did on your video, you had NFPA link up, which is really cool.
Yeah. There's 13 like inspection items. But it basically comes down to, we're going to look at the fire door. We're going to make sure that it's properly listed, labeled. It's the right rating that's supposed to be there. The other thing about NFPA 80 is you're always inspecting to the most, you're doing your ITM to the most recent edition of NFPA 80, but it only needs to comply with the edition of NFPA 80 that was being enforced at the time of installation, right? So you're not looking at, they changed the requirements for this door and now I have to like put a new door in. No, that's not right. That's not how it is. It's like, these are the items I need to look at. So even the ratings, like that is where it gets a little confusing to determine whether or not it's the right rating. But that usually is like the first inspection that you do, and then you determine what it needs to be, and then you just keep checking that. Because there are some allowances in 101, and maybe there was changes to the jurisdiction that like the door might not actually be what the current edition of 101 would require. But you're just looking at the listing. You're making sure that the door is not damaged. All of the components work properly. The door self-closes. The door self-latches. If there's any glass, it's not broken. Right. There's no signage on the door that's over 5% of the area of the door. That's an important thing. We don't want to put combustible material on the door. And you're not...
interesting.
You can't be putting signage on the glazing. So that's another requirement, NFPA 80, that not a lot of people follow. The biggest one is like if it's an automatic door, they usually put the sticker that says automatic door right on the glass. That's actually not permitted by NFPA 80. And that's you don't want to be putting combustible material on that separation. So just the biggest thing is making sure it's not damaged and then checking the gaps. That's one thing that's going to, over time, like you're going to get damage to the door. And then also it's just the buildings move, the doors get tweaked, right? You need to check that there's proper gaps between the door and the frame. So based on the material of the door, it's typically between an eighth of an inch plus or minus a 16th of an inch. You're going out measuring the gaps. Make sure it's not too tight and not too much open. And then you want to check that the undercut on the door and making sure that that's proper. And then field modifications. NFPA 80 has some job site preparations that you're allowed to do to a fire door assembly. If it's anything above that, you need to get approval from the listing agency to do any work on that door. So you just need to make sure that people aren't putting items, components on a door that would stop it from working. Like the biggest one that you see is people put like the kick down door stops on the door. Like that's not permitted. It's not permitted to chalk open fire doors. You can't put that kind of stuff on a fire door.
Yep. So on the inspection side, essentially, now I say anybody can do it, but NFPA says qualified. Does it say qualified personnel?
It's all up to I was looking for the specific. It's just it's basically just qualified to the authority having jurisdiction. So the person has to have knowledge of the doors, how they're supposed to operate, how they're supposed to be inspecting them, and the authority having jurisdiction would state what that qualification is.
And if there's a big fix, then you bring in a door company probably.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a new owner, if this is like your first time doing it, maybe you do hire someone who is more educated on the fire code requirements and building code requirements to like do that first initial survey. I know a lot of people will have someone do a survey of all the fire doors in their building. That would create that list of doors that needs to be inspected. They'll determine whether or not they're compliant at that time. And then, just looking forward, you're just looking for the damages, making sure that there aren't any changes to those doors.
Yep. Yeah, I think overall, like even in your residence, right? I think it's good to know this knowledge because, even when you're sleeping at night, your door should be closed, right? Everybody in the fire industry kind of, I think, understands that, but maybe the public doesn't.
Yeah, no, close before you doze. That's also,
Oh, I've never heard that. That's good.
So the Fire Safety Research Institute, that's their close before you doze, close the door. That's it. In homes, though, the doors aren't rated. A lot of that relies on just fire dynamics and like limiting oxygen and air movement that actually limits the fire from moving. It's not like because a lot of the doors, they can just be hollow wood doors.
Yeah.
But just the act of closing it would stop the air from being able to move and actually spreading into those bases. It's a significant impact on having doors shut.
Yeah, it is interesting. And, obviously gives you time to get out too, right? If there's an issue. So
yeah, I've heard many stories from firefighters. One specifically where they went in, house fire. They went in, put the fire out, and then they went into a bedroom, and they woke somebody up. They had no clue that there was a fire. You wouldn't even know that the house was on fire, but their door was shut, and they didn't even know. And just the impact of having a door shut is insane.
That's wild that they didn't have. Well, they probably didn't have smoke detectors, or
it didn't wake them up. This is another get into low frequency smoke alarm deal. Like you might not go woken up, or some codes don't necessarily require you to have, or like local codes don't require you to have a smoke alarm in the bedroom, so you might have not actually even heard it. Find out that
loud enough downstairs.
72. All NFPA standards would have required you to have one in it, but I know a lot of, even like Massachusetts, when you sell a house, they just require you to have one on every floor, right? So there is a case in which you might not have one in there.
That's true. All right, so that's fire doors. What about fire dampers? Obviously, in the HVAC system, when are those required anyway? Fire dampers.
Anytime. Smoke dampers. So fire dampers are anytime you're basically penetrating a firewall, or a floor, or a fire floor, like a rated floor assembly. You're gonna have a fire damper. Smoke dampers are basically anytime you're penetrating a smoke barrier or smoke partition. There's a little bit more nuances to that as far as like the smoke damper side, because like technically, if you're just running a duct through a smoke compartment, you don't have to put smoke dampers if you don't have any registers in that space. But typically, if you're going through a smoke barrier, you're gonna have a smoke damper, and then if you're going through a fire barrier, it's gonna be a fire damper. And if it's a combination smoke fire barrier, then you're gonna have a combination smoke fire damper.
Around what year was that starting to be required? Because you have a lot of buildings you maintain, right? And when did that start getting enacted more, where fire dampers became more of a thing?
I couldn't tell you. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it's been around. Fire dampers have been around for a while. Smoke dampers, again, I talked about healthcare. Like you see them a lot in healthcare, because healthcare, you have a lot of smoke compartmentation. You have a lot of smoke zones. So you do have a lot more smoke barriers to smoke partitions in hospitals. So a lot more smoke dampers. You're mostly going to be seeing just fire dampers in most buildings, because you don't really have smoke barriers and partitions in other buildings.
Yeah, it's interesting. Funny enough, my sister worked for an HVAC. She still works there, but worked for an HVAC contractor, and they were big on the fire damper and even smoke damper side. Mm-hmm. But it was mainly in healthcare. Yeah, like there's all these commercial buildings with, they have them installed, but it's only kind of regulated at healthcare and maybe some bigger manufacturing. But it's like, man, there's so many other commercial applications, and are they even getting maintained? And then you go back to the enforcement question there too, right? Yeah,
well, fire dampers are even, like, just dampers are even harder in general, because they're usually up and hidden away and not accessible. While like NFPA 101, 5000, so the NFPA's building code requires them to all be accessible. So you have to have accessible hatches to get to the damper. It has to be labeled. I mean, older buildings, they just kind of get stuffed away, and then they get forgotten about. Yeah. So that's another issue. I mean, fire dampers, smoke dampers are also big. If you're doing like HVAC shutdown, what you could be using dampers instead of that. So like if you're doing like a high-rise building and you're doing the sandwich design where you're like pressurizing one and depressurizing others, that can be done with dampers. So you might have those in those kinds of buildings as well.
Gotcha.
But smoke dampers are typically run off the fire alarm. So you've got, because you have to have some sort of smoke detection. You usually have a duct detector or using area smoke detection, and then the fire alarm is going to be closing that damper. So when you're doing smoke damper inspections, obviously the first thing you're looking at, making sure they're not obstructed, but then you've got to do essentially an integrated test, because you got to use the fire alarm to trigger that damper to make sure it's working properly.
It's interesting that, all right, on the integrated test, obviously you want to make sure, and NFP4 is getting into that, where you're making sure the whole system works, right? But I'm just putting my hat on of like, hey, I'm a fire alarm service provider. If I'm going in and doing the annual NFPA 72 test, why not?
Yeah.
Like test the smoke while you're there, and they may be doing it, and I may be wrong. I'm just assuming that they're not doing it. But all right, well, why don't I have a one or two technicians certified to work on smoke or fire dampers, right? If you're doing the annual test anyway, just toss it into the contract.
Yeah, from a fire alarm contractor perspective, you should know if there's smoke dampers, right? You're gonna know that there's output.
You're gonna know
that it's closing them. Smoke dampers, they only need to be inspected every 4 years, so it's not as often as you would be going up there doing the duct detectors or whatever. But at least you're up there. You know where those things are. That's where you'd be doing those. Same thing for fire dampers. It's 4 years. It's 1 year after you install it, and then 4 years after that. Hospitals can go up to 6 years. So again, it's not as often as you're doing the fire alarm stuff, but it could be something that you're doing. I mean, if now the building codes, fire codes are all requiring you, if you're testing a system and it's got a subordinate system, you need to confirm the response of that. So technically, fire alarm contractors need to be looking at that smoke damper every time they fire it off to make sure it's closing.
Right.
They can't just be checking the relay or output module. They need to be looking at it.
So it would push it back to an annual, right? Almost.
An annual verification that it closes.
That it closes, yeah. Yeah, I guess all the nuances of NFPA 105 or whatever wouldn't be in there.
There's a little bit more that you would get into, whether or not the HVAC is running at that time and all that. But from a 101-1-5000 IBC, where they state that you have to confirm the response, you should be checking that damper to make sure it's charged.
Yeah. So with fire dampers, obviously you have the one with the link that's kind of self-contained. Is there a fire damper that is connected to the fire alarm panel at all?
You could. I think it's less common. Most of the ones that I'm seeing are all just, so they're not actuated, meaning that they just have the link that drops them. You can have one that's actuated, but then you'd have to have a heat detector up there, which I would assume is less common, depending on what your opening looks like. Some of them could just be an air transfer opening. It might not be in a duct. So, but depending on all of that, how you would have that.
Well, even if with a heat detector, the heat detector is just connected directly to the damper. It's not connected back to the fire alarm system.
It could. I'm not sure exactly how that would be. I think it could be either way. You could do it through the fire alarms. It's the same thing with fire doors and drop-in fire doors. You could do it. It could just be one contained unit with its own detector, or you can do it through the fire alarm system. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, there's probably the ways to do it. Now I'm thinking about it, like if you have it connected back to like a fire door, if you know that fire door is open for X amount of time, it would send a signal back to the fire alarm panel, right? Saying you gotta.
So the most common way that we're interfacing a fire door with the fire alarm system is just going to be the magnetic hold opens.
Yep.
So there's no way that a fire alarm system would know. Like, it's always sending power to those magnets to keep it open. It just lets them go when there's a fire. It doesn't actually know if the door shuts.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
In most cases, even if you have like a power operated fire door, which means like it can open and shut itself, for the most part, the fire alarm system's cutting power, and then when you cut power to a power operator, automatically just shuts.
It shuts.
It just goes to a self closer. So there's no way that the fire alarm system would necessarily know that it's shut.
It wouldn't know. Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking like, remote inspection, or not remote inspection, but more remote monitoring. Right.
So yeah, on the 80 and 105 side for dampers, there is allowances for remote inspection and testing of these. So there'll be limit switches that test it. It's all got to be listed. I don't remember off the top of my head. You still have to go in I want to say it's every 3 times and confirm. You can do some remote testing. Now, that's not, you don't have that for fire doors. So
more the damper side, because they're not accessible. I can see that, if you can't get up there.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, this passive fire protection, a bunch of people have been commenting on my LinkedIn as well, of like, it's called passive, and it feels like it's not being looked at, and you pushed it back to that potential on the enforcement side, because that's what's going to drive a lot of this.
Enforcement and education, yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering, we have all these compliance platforms that these AHJs are rolling out, right? Which manage all of their buildings in a city or wherever their jurisdiction is, right? They look at their fire alarm systems, they look at their sprinkler, they're even looking at the extinguishers, right? Mm-hmm. Well, let's just add fire doors and fire dampers to that. Like, those are part of the system. And I may reach out to some of those platforms, because like that's just as important sometimes to the HJs, and there's no way they could enforce it through those platforms, essentially, right? And then they know how many buildings out there have fire doors and have fire dampers. So I think there's probably an easier way to do it, and it could be just regulating through those platforms. And then the contractors, if they allow those contractors doing the fire alarm or extinguishers, allow them to at least go in and do the inspection, they're going to grab a lot of data. And while you're doing the extinguishers, might as well look at the fire doors, right?
And almost every building has a fire door in it.
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
If you've got a stairwell, you've got a fire door, because the doors into the exit stairwells are all rated. But maybe that's another reason why it's from the resourcing side, because all of a sudden, if you're looking at doors and dampers, now you're just introducing all of the buildings in your jurisdiction. I don't know if that comes into play, but very, very much not looked at as much as I think it should be. I think people look at fire doors and don't think much can happen. I like when I see a fire door chalked open, it's painful for me, because it's so dangerous. We were talking about, I go to my dentist's office twice a year, and I take the stairs, and every time I take the stairs, like at least half of the doors are chalked open. And I think it all started with COVID, and this was like a big thing in COVID where they were chalking open all the doors so people weren't using the handles together. Yeah. But then I just like kind of stayed, and every time I go, I pull all the door chalks, but then every time I go back, they're like still there. And it's just an education thing. They probably hate me. They're like, why all of a sudden all of our doors are shut? But like, if you imagine like a fire started on any of those floors, all of a sudden your stairwell is no longer tenable. Because now, like, it's a huge thing that, like, it's a pretty big consequence for something that people don't seem to think it's like a big issue, having a door chalked open.
Yeah, kind of wild. So this is great info. Again, keep up with the videos and all that. I'm really excited to see them out there, and again, getting more information out to the masses, even to the public, right? Is important. Like
I think like my drive for some of the videos recently is like thinking of a facility manager who's just trying to like learn a little bit more about their building.
Right.
So like someone might have said, oh, yep, fire doors, they need to be inspected, right? Like, oh, why and what needs to be done? Like that's the kind of stuff I'm trying to focus on, like a little bit above and beyond some of the basics of these things.
Yeah, and some of the simple things that they can do themselves, right?
Yeah.
And just be aware of it. And it's a small procedure. It's probably not going to cost much, if anything. Yeah, if you have a company come in and do it, it's probably going to add a cost. But if you can do it internally as a facility manager on the visual and just basic inspection side, it's pretty critical.
Yeah, oh, certainly. And even just looking at it's just getting an understanding of your building in general too, right? Like you're going to be able to start noticing an issue with a door before you need to like all of a sudden replace it. Like you might be able to keep track of, you know, the health of these types of components of a building.
Yep.
Yeah.
Are you heading out to Las Vegas for C&E?
I will be there. Yeah. So June 15th. Well, that's the Sunday. So 16th through the 18th is our conference and expo. I'll be out there in Las Vegas. Looking forward to it. You gonna be there, Drew?
I plan to be. I know Inspect Point will be there, and we have another company joining us. I can't announce it just yet, but maybe by this time this airs, it'll be announced. But anyway, they'll be there as well. So really cool to see everybody. I know this is the bigger show because, you know, selfishly I like it in Boston because it's an easy train ride for me. But Las Vegas is they got the big draw, right?
Yeah, Vegas is always our biggest years. Boston's always a love-hate with a lot of us locals. It's close, but also we're not staying there, so we have to drive in and out of Boston every day. So it's always a long day. But yeah, so we'll be in Vegas for the next two years.
Oh, nice.
So just we're reusing our contracts up from during the COVID time where we have to.
Yep.
Had to get those reused. So we'll be there for this year, and we'll be back there again next year. Yeah, it's always a big draw, which is it's exciting, like being out there.
Is it Mandalay Bay or where is it?
Mandalay Bay.
Oh yeah, that's a big conference center.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. I'm looking forward. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, anything specific out there like that you guys are highlighting this year?
I think the big thing that I'm excited about is you can basically go to our conference for free and get 2 or 3 days worth of educational content. You get to go to all 400 plus exhibitors. You get the Expo Advantage Pass, which is free to go and see the Expo, which I highly recommend anybody goes. So you can see what's new and upcoming from all of the exhibitors there. But then we have 2 theaters that we're putting together. Last year, we did 2 theaters. One was a natural disaster theater, and one was latest issues facing firefighters. This year, we're redoing the latest issues facing firefighters theater, which is all free educational content geared towards like middle management firefighters, but focused on the training academy of the future. So like, what does it look like training firefighters going forward? So a big looking at like immersive learning, augmented reality, asynchronous learning. How are people applying that, as well as looking at technologies that allow you to train firefighters in that way? So all like simulators and things. I'm excited to see what that has coming forward. And then we also have a theater for facility managers in hospitality venues. So that's it was our focus because Vegas has a lot of hospitality.
Oh, totally.
Venues. Yeah. But it's kind of geared towards most facility managers, the way the presentations landed, but a lot about how are we using technology to perform the inspection, testing, and maintenance that we're required to get some on sprinkler systems. We've got ones talking about fire alarm systems, mass notification systems. There's one that I'm excited about, which is like, how do you prepare your building and maintain your building during a wildfire to make sure that the occupants inside are safe? So what does that look like from
oh wow,
a lot that gets into dampers and HVAC and having to protect your building, which I'm interested in seeing what that one is. So I think the thing to take away is you can go to our conference and expo for free and get 2 or 3 days worth of content as well as that expo. Or you can come and get the conference pass. There's over 130 presentations going on, which
it's insane how many presentations that go, and just walking around the expo hall, and you guys have those presentations throughout the expo
in the
hall
theater.
too.
Yeah, the 2 theaters in the back. Yeah.
It's always the highlight of the year, right? And
it's a big one. We always refer to it as the Super Bowl of NFPA Super Bowl. It's a lot of work. I work as the technical lead for a lot of the educational content. I run the review process for all the proposals. We're already working on next year. We haven't even gotten to this.
Wow.
We're already running call for proposals for next year. We're thinking about planning, we're already looking at what these theaters are going to look like next year. So maybe if it's too late, you're not going to be able to make it this year. We are most likely going to have these same theaters going forward where you'll have these opportunities to get these educational sessions as well for next.
Yeah, my team wanted me to speak at one, and I was like, I think one of the theaters was open or whatever, and I was like, I'm speaking a lot this year. I actually just spoke on AI in fire protection and how that's transforming just our business every day. And it's like every week something's happening with AI, and
it's insane. We have a panel on that at CNE this year. That'll be.
Oh, you do? Okay.
It's like the use of AI, mostly from the facility management side. Like, how do we?
Oh, interesting.
AI?
Yeah, because I know there's a lot on the code side, and that's a sensitive topic. But it's it's doing a lot of things in our day-to-day lives, and how do we use that effectively, but also be thoughtful in how we do it too.
Understand the limitations. I feel like that's the most important thing, right?
Yes.
Understand what your limitations are with it.
Yeah, I had some angry people, very excited people at President. There's about 300 people there, but there were some, there was some comments thrown around at the end too. So
yeah, I can imagine.
riling everybody up.
Yeah.
Well, good. Yeah. We'll get this out here soon, and looking forward to seeing you here at CNE. And I'll probably talk to you before then.
Yeah, of course.
And be commenting on all your videos and stuff. Where can everybody find you? And anything about what you're doing online?
LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me. That's where I'm posting most of my stuff. I do have an Instagram. I'm trying to remember the name. I think it's FPLS. I don't. I'll give you the name. You can throw it.
Yeah, I'll drop it.
I don't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, if you want to follow me on Instagram for the same videos I'm posting on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, thanks again, Shawn, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
As always, thanks for having me, Drew.
All right. Thanks, man. This was episode 77 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by InspectPoint. I want to thank Shawn Mahoney for coming on today, again from NFPA, to discuss everything passive fire protection with regards to fire doors, dampers, and smoke control. So look forward to seeing everybody at the NFPA CNE here in June. And thanks for liking and subscribing. See you again soon.